Hi, I'm Damali Peterman. I'm here with Tahmina Watson, who is an incredible immigration lawyer and friend. And so I just want to welcome her to this Zoom podcast. Welcome,
Thank you
Tahmina.
so much. Thank you so much, Damali. I'm so honored to be on your podcast. It's been an incredible time witnessing how you have come to be this incredible, entrepreneur and lawyer making some very big changes in the world. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, I've learned from the best. You're incredible and inspirational. And what I usually like to do is to give people a sense of who you are and what you do. And then I want to ask you a few questions because given your expertise in immigration law, there's so many things that are happening in the world right now, pre-coronavirus, post-coronavirus, and I just want to kind of get some insight from you and then tell people how they can reach out to you if they want to follow up. And so first, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you. Yes. My name is Tahmina Watson. I am an immigration attorney in Seattle, Washington. If people have tuned into my accent, I'm not originally from here. I was born and raised in London, UK. And then I went through the immigration process when I had my own sleepless in Seattle moment and found my dream man here. And so I went through the immigration process and got my green card and eventually started practicing immigration law here because I was a lawyer in the UK and I had to go through retraining. My practice is primarily business immigration, which means employers hiring foreign workers or foreign investors investing in businesses and getting work permits through that. I help people reunite with their loved ones, mums, children, parents, spouses, and I help people get citizenship, but my primary focus is business immigration. I don't go to court, that's the one thing I don't do, but to help that side of my passion, I have a nonprofit that helps non-immigration lawyers trained to be lawyers in the courtroom in the immigration courts. And that is called WIDEN, Washington Immigrant Defense Network. But my day job is being an immigration lawyer at Watson Immigration Law. I do have a podcast. I actually have a book that I'm working on to have a second edition called The Startup Visa. I'm a policy wonk, and I'm somebody who feels very passionately about the community that I live in, the community that I serve, and immigrants in general.
This is amazing. I'm happy to have you on the show. I think that people can see that you are an expert in immigration. You're a published author. You have a podcast, but I also have heard you on the radio and you've been on TV. And I know that you're a well sought after thought leader in this area. And I want to give people a sense of how they can communicate with you, of course, through LinkedIn at Tahmina Watson, and your name is, visible for everyone to see the spelling. And then also through your podcast, which is available. I know that I subscribe to it, an Apple Podcast. Is it also available somewhere else?
Yes, thank you for asking. It's called Tahmina Talks Immigration. It used to be a live radio show for 2 years. It was so fun being a radio show host. It's on Apple, Spotify, any way that you get your podcast, you can find Tahmina Talks Immigration. I am coming up with a second podcast called Tahmina Talks, so I can talk about anything. And if you were to ask my husband, he'd say Tahmina talks and talks and talks and talks and talks. And so I've got a way to talk about anything I want, and that's coming soon. And then I have a blog, and it's a very active blog. Anybody who's interested in immigration issues, I would ask you to subscribe at www.watsonimmigrationlaw.com, and everything about me will be found on that one website. So thank you for asking.
Absolutely. And what I'll do is I'll make sure I put all those links at the bottom where we post this podcast so that everyone can get in touch with you, follow you on social media, and just continue to follow your journey, because I know that I personally learn so much from you every time that we have a conversation. I also subscribe to your blog. I read a lot of the things that you post, and I feel like you've always been like hand in hand with some of the changes that we've been seeing happening, regardless of the administration, but in particular with the current administration and with COVID-19, as it's changing a lot of the ways that we handle immigration policy. And so the first question that I'll ask you is, really, like, what do you think of what's going on right now with immigration law? It's a very broad question, intentionally, to see what you care about at this time.
Well, I'm so glad you brought it up. And I think you're absolutely right. Since this administration came into office, immigration has adversely changed. And it has changed very quickly and in some ways slowly. And some are very visible, like the travel ban, and some were behind the scenes where the layperson wouldn't necessarily see those changes. For example, there was a policy change in a particular application form, and hopefully we'll talk about tourist visas, but there was a change that came in a few months ago where people had to do fingerprinting for these tourist visas. And that was an unnoticed change. But what happened with that is it prolonged the way these applications were going to be processed. And now they're taking many, many months, and COVID-19 has put a different type of wrench in it. That's a tiny little example of an unnoticed change that has had a big impact. But you know, your readers, listeners, viewers might already know about the travel ban and the various iterations. And so me, as an immigration lawyer, in Seattle, started a committee called the Response Committee with the local Immigration Lawyers Association, where I was essentially getting our immigration lawyers everywhere they were needed in a pro bono capacity. But the problems kept coming. They kept coming, and they sort of came to the separation of parents situation that we were all witnessing on our news channels, but they were at our doorstep. We had 200 separated parents in Seattle who needed lawyers. And that gave birth to the organization that I had been envisioning for about 18 months, where lawyers like Damali, who don't know immigration law, could actually get some meaningful help to immigrants. But what has happened in quick succession is these policies have just been compounded. And COVID-19 has exposed what this is all doing. And so one of the things to think about is COVID-19's impact on workers. If you think about, you know, I often tell people, just look at your phone, the hardware, the software, the network, all of it is being operated and managed by skilled, high-skilled immigrants who are working at various telephone companies, or you know, whatever you are using on your daily basis in your applications, you have foreign skilled workers working on them. But there are a lot of compliance issues, and one of those compliance issues is to work at the office that has been stated in the application form. Suddenly we have remote work. What are the rules about that? And if you have a foreign worker, you've got to keep paying them whether you have work or not. And so COVID-19 has given rise to unprecedented issues that we've never had to face before. And we are interpreting law in the way that it is meant to be. And we're hoping for the best. But if you're working from home, you've got to go through these compliance issues. So HR people who are dealing with their employees on a daily basis for just regular HR issues, and now faced with unprecedented compliance issues that they have to monitor for everybody. So COVID-19 is bringing different challenges for different categories of immigrants. And what we need to do as immigration lawyers is keep on top of things and anticipate the problems and proactively tell our clients, these are the things you need to do right this moment. And so, you know, we can talk about categories, and I think one of the things that you might want to talk about is tourists. And if that's what you want to hear about, I can tell you some horror stories about what tourists are facing.
Yeah, I'd love to hear, you know, not about horror stories, but we'd love to hear, we love to hear some of the things that you've been seeing, because tourism, as you know, is a huge category and huge industry in the United States and other countries. And as we all know, that tourism has been greatly and gravely impacted by COVID-19. But I think thinking about it from the perspective of immigration is something that we haven't taken a deep dive into. So absolutely tell us about that.
Thank you. So tourists, when they come to the US, there are two types of tourist visas. One is called Visa Waiver. So, you know, when I was coming from the UK, I just waived my passport and come into the US. That's visa waiver. And what that really means is you're waiving a lot of rights. Right to go to the court and right to change your status to something else, and you have a 90-day period to stay here. That's visa waiver. Often people will know it as something called ESTA. It's an electronic travel permission. You know, they do a security check on that, and that validity gives you permission to be here, but no more than 90 days. The other visa category is a B1, B2. People who come to the US will see their visa stamp is B1/B2. B1 is business visa. You're coming here for meetings, to see clients. You're not getting paid in the US, but you're coming here for a limited amount of time for business reasons. And B2 is purely tourism. You're coming here for Disneyland or whatever your purpose is. Those visas will only allow you to be here for 6 months only. An immigration law officer could give you less time, and very rarely would they give you a little bit more time if there was a medical emergency. But on average, the rule of thumb is 6 months. Now, a lot of people have arrived in the US 3, 4, 5 months ago, but our COVID-19 issues started in March, where things started to be locked down. They'd already been here for 4, 5, 6 months. Suddenly they can't leave. And so the two types of scenarios is the 90-day visa waiver and the B2. So what does the 90-day visa waiver person do? Because of the waiver, they cannot extend their status. So for them, they have to get something called satisfactory departure permission from CBP, the Customs and Border Protection folks. And there's a system for that. It's not working for everybody very easily, but they've got to be persistent. So if you are in the US on a 90-day visa waiver program, you have got to talk to a lawyer, and you've got to figure out how you can stay beyond, because the government hasn't given a blanket, you know, mercy for all. You just don't, we don't have it. Immigration lawyers and the Immigration Lawyers Association has advocated for it, but we're in an administration that has children in cages. What do they care about mercy? So you've got to protect yourself. And so that's what's happening with the 90-day visa waiver, folks. You've got to get satisfactory departure. Now, with the trouble is that planes are not leaving. You know, the practical difficulties are insurmountable. We've had clients who have said, hey, you know, I don't have a direct flight going out of Seattle to my country, but I have an indirect flight going to such and such country, but they won't let me land. So suddenly you really are trapped, but you're between a rock and a hard place. So satisfactory departure, anybody who's listening to this must write that down if you're on a visa waiver. If you're on a B2 visa, you must extend your status. You do have the privilege of extending your status. And the form for that is called an I-539. And this can be filed online or by paper. As an immigration lawyer, as a traditionalist, I have always used paper, primarily because the online system wasn't reliable. It has somewhat become better over the last year and a half, 2 years, I'd say, but not necessarily. So as a protocol at my office, we always file paper filings. But paper filings in the COVID-19 also has its own issues. How is the client getting it signed? Because it has to be a wet signature, and then it has to come to our office, and then we have, you know, staggered employees. The one thing that USCIS, that's the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, have said is that they will accept copy signatures. That means not a DocuSign signature. It means that you put your signature on a paper, you scan it and send it to your lawyer, and then we can use that. But that has come with caveats too. The government said we can ask for the original signature anytime. And because a government agency can flip-flop from their policies, we don't want to take chances. So we're actually filing original signatures. But in the midst of all of this, just before the country essentially shut down, February 24th, 2020, the administration implemented a new policy, a very controversial policy called public charge. And public charge means you have to prove to the government that you are financially self-sufficient. And that means you've got to be able to prove that you have the financial means to be here. Now, this used to be the case already if you are extending your status to prove that you've got the finances to support yourself. Now that standard has increased several times over. The forms require you to promise that you haven't sought any public benefits, and then the scrutiny on your finances have gone up. So now if you think about Jane Doe, who is, let's say, from somewhere in Europe, who's maybe just come out of university, and they're here, they did the Disneyland, they did the Legoland, they did all the things that they've been wanting to do forever. Now they're stuck here, but there's not a lot of money to show for it. And so this is a very new rule that went into effect in February. We haven't had enough time to see the impact of it, but it's going to be compounded with the COVID-19 problems that we're seeing. And so for tourists in particular, it's very important you monitor when your last date is to be here. If you can leave, do leave, because, you know, you're going to face challenges no matter what. But I think the problem with going back to your own country, I mean, even Hawaii isn't letting people from mainland US go to Hawaii. So why would another country allow people from the US, where we have the least, you know, leadership in coronavirus, you know, handling? Why would they let us back in? And so there are lots of practical issues to grapple with. But if you can leave, I would suggest you do, because there are issues. But what I will say is some people have this very common question that if I do file an extension, by the way, there is money involved. If you have a lawyer, you're going to have to pay the lawyer. If you're going to file this form, every form has a fee attached to it. And so know that there is a fee for that. But when you file it, and let's say the country reopens in August, your case is likely to be pending still. Can you leave? The answer is yes. The best practice is once you leave, notify the USCIS that you've left, because then they're not necessarily going to write to you with a denial. They'll write to you saying, we notice you have left the country, we deny your case. If possible, it's best not to have a denial on record. You can write to them saying, I now hereby withdraw, please take my case away, and they'll just say, we've closed your case. But COVID-19 has given rise to a lot of unprecedented situations where people can't stay, but they can't leave, and there's no good way to stay, and it's challenging all around for everybody.
It sounds like a really tough time to be, you know, an immigrant, and a very busy time to be an immigration lawyer, or working for the governments of the various countries who are handling immigration-related requests. This is very helpful, very insightful. I think with just what you've stated, it gives a lot of people a lot to think about and consider. And also it just kind of hones in on the fact that it's hard to do this by yourself. It's overwhelming. Yeah. There are a lot of rules that you may not know about, and it's not really the time to be a do-it-yourself immigration lawyer.
Right, and I'll add two things. Number one, airlines are also not necessarily understanding everything. So there was an article that came out earlier this week. Air India is not allowing people to fly to the US or back to India. There are various issues with airlines. But the second big thing that I want to make sure that everybody understands is a month ago today, this administration, the president signed an executive order issuing a new travel ban. And the travel ban essentially allowed his initial agenda, and you may remember this, the word chain migration became part of everyday vernacular, which wasn't part of the regular vocabulary until he made it so. And chain migration is essentially visas, green cards for parents, spouses, not spouses too, green cards for spouses, siblings, and adult children. He had a caveat for spouses, but parents, siblings, and adult children cannot get green cards for a 60-day period through this travel ban. Now, embassies were going to be closed anyway for 60 days. He didn't necessarily have to have a travel ban for that. But what it does is this administration's initial agenda to limit immigration is now being accomplished, because what we can envision and anticipate is that those rules will be expanded. We expanded for another 60 days, another 60 days. Who knows when that will end? But what that travel ban did, and maybe your listeners remember this, there was a flurry of fear and tweets and anxiety because he had a tweet saying suspending immigration, and we didn't know what it meant.
Right.
And so 2 days later, that's when the travel ban came along. And it really, there was a lot of fear about what he would do with work visas. It wasn't enough time between the Monday of tweeting to the Wednesday of signing to figure out what trouble he can cause. But they did buy 30 days to say we will add more restrictions, and today is 30 days. So I woke up thinking, what am I going to hear about this evening? Because this administration's favorite day to give bad news is a Friday evening. So we could potentially see news coming out, if not today, early next week, about what kind of restrictions they're going to put on work visas and other type of visa categories. And student visas are very likely on a chopping block, because student visas have a program at the end of their graduation to work and get training, like internships. And that has been something on their agenda. So what is going to be very important for your listeners and viewers to monitor, particularly if these are issues that affect them, whether they're a work visa holder, a student, or a tourist, or somebody who is sponsoring their family member, you've got to watch this closely. And you've got to monitor, and you've got to fight. You know, immigration lawyers have been fighting the fight since this administration came into office. But what is so clear is that this fight has to be the people's fight. If you are affected in any way, you've got to stand up and have your voice heard. But what happens time and time and time again is people are afraid of retaliation. People are, if they're a business, they were like, I don't know if this is a good time. I don't know. I don't want to sue. Individuals like, I don't really want to sue. What's going to happen to my application or these other siblings that I've applied for? There is a lot of fear, and it's rightly so. But we can't live in fear, because if we do not step up and stand up and have our voices heard, this will continue. And one of the things that people don't understand enough is that when there is an immigration policy that is affecting an immigrant, by virtue of that immigrant's work or family connections, a US citizen, individual, or a US business is being harmed. And with COVID-19 affecting the economy, where we have record millions of people unemployed, immigrants are job creators. They are job generators. They are, COVID-19 has exposed what immigrants really do. If you think about going to the grocery store, how is that shiny apple on that table? It's because an immigrant has picked that apple. You know, I live in Washington State, where the dairy industry is a large one in the country. We have one of the largest agricultural industries, one of the largest tech industries, of course. But if you think about each industry in its own sort of silo, you will see what the immigrants are doing. You're sitting at home and we're doing this Zoom because the Zoom founder was never allowed to be in the US on a visa. Your listeners perhaps don't know it. His visa was cancelled, denied many times over. You know, we are able to work remotely because, again, that phone, the network, the software, the hardware, they're operated by it. And so immigrants are doing so much for the country that it has never been more clear. And if we don't understand it, we can't fight for it. And so people should take stock of what they're doing now that they're home, and how are they doing it. Luckily, we're allowed to go to the grocery store, you know, thank goodness, you know, but think about how that grocery store is operating, the farm to table that's happening. And so it's important that the American values are treasured and understood. We go back to basics. We're America, we're a land of immigrants. We all come from immigrant backgrounds, whether it's second generation, first generation, third generation. If you're not a Native American, you have immigrant ancestry. Value that, think about that, and then take action.
And that was so well said and so eloquent that I don't even want to take away from that. I mean, everything that you said really hit home for me, and I think for everyone that's tuning in. And I like that you said we can't live in this shadow of fear, that it's something that we have to think about, like the bigger picture. And we need to make sure that everyone's thinking about the fact that this country was built on the backs of immigrants. And I think that Lin-Manuel Miranda says in Hamilton, his successful Broadway film, which will also, I think, be on Disney Plus, very soon, said that immigrants, we get the job done. And so I love that you were able to share so many jewels in a short period of time, Tahmina. I think everyone should find a way to have some time with you, to hire you, because you have a very important role that you're playing. And I feel like a lot of work that lawyers do are behind the scenes. Like we make so many things possible, but we're not out there on billboards or on commercials or on TV. We put our heads down, we get the work done, and we help people. And one thing that I know about you is that you are super passionate about what you do. You've had your practice for over a decade now. And it's been successful. And I personally know people who have worked with you and were able to get their citizenship or their work visas. And that's because of your devotion and dedication and your ability to continue to adapt as the laws are adapting and changing right in front of us. And so I just want to thank you on behalf of those who are listening, those of you who've helped, and those of you who've inspired with your words today. Because even for me, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I can't wait to kind of put a synopsis of it underneath this video, but I hope that it opens eyes for everyone that's tuning in, and it puts some more questions, in their minds that they can say, if I'm here on a temporary visa, if I'm here on a work visa, if I'm here for whatever reason, or if I have family members or friends who I know are sort of engaged in the immigration process, how can we send them to you so that you can see if they're a good fit for Watson Immigration?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and pleasure, and I love chatting to you. I could talk all day, so thank you.
We have a great time. So thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll put some information at the bottom of the chat, and hopefully we'll see what happens today with that new law, if they come out with some news today. Thank you again, Tahmina, for joining us.
Thank you.